Thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Thanks, Diane, and welcome to your viewers from a little bit of a cold Melbourne, Australian morning today.
Explain to the listeners why salespeople must tell stories.
Sure. Well, storytelling is a bit of a hot topic these days. But, I've been very fortunate. You said I was engineer turned salesperson, Diane. I had no intention of being a salesperson. I was given the opportunity to move to Norway, but the hook was I had to be a salesperson. So that was my dilemma more than 20 years ago. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time, by the way.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was a reluctant salesperson more than 20 years ago, going to Norway and learning that craft as someone who is, a technical person really, and someone who pretty much considered sales a black, untrustworthy art. And I had the incredible good fortune, Diane, of landing the biggest deal in our division worldwide from Norway as a rookie salesperson, and it was all absolute luck. I just happened to meet what the CEB folks would call a mobilizer, someone that decided that his company needed my software and sold it.
Nice.
So that was nice, but of course I thought I was good. That's a big problem with salespeople. The buyer buys, and you think you're good, and I certainly wasn't good. I was extremely poor at the job, but I was working for a company that was Schlumberger, and a company that really provides excellent sales training, and I found that I enjoyed it, and I ended up running sales teams in Russia and all around Europe, and I had lived already in Asia. And so, I was starting to hit my straps. And then when I had to come back to Australia, there was no oil and gas industry here in Melbourne. So I really needed to sort of configure my CV, and sales was the transferable skill. And I landed a job selling telecommunications equipment to our big local telecommunications carrier, sort of like the equivalent of the AT&T in the US. And it sold products that I had no idea what they were, or into an industry I didn't understand, to a client that I didn't know. And it was storytelling that got me that job. I'd already pretty much figured out that telling stories was the way to persuade, even though I wasn't that conscious of the types of stories I was telling at that time. That was back in the early 2000s. And since then, I changed industries 4 more times. And so I've been in that situation where I don't really know my products and services. I don't know the company I'm with that well yet. I certainly don't know my client. And I learned to seek out certain types of stories, Diane. And that was kind of when I started to figure that there's a method there. And I started to notice who tells stories. And what I noticed was that very often the founders or the CEOs of companies are good storytellers, and almost inevitably the best salespeople are good storytellers, but they're somewhat unconscious at that skill. And the rest of the company generally wasn't, and the rest of the sales team generally wasn't. I set up consulting in B2B sales about 4 years ago, and I'd done very well. I sold more than $1 billion worth of stuff. So I'd done very well. I wasn't really setting myself up to make a lot of money or to found a business, but I'm an engineer still, and I was very curious about the problem of how do you help salespeople say the right thing, because my recurring experience as a sales leader, and I was running teams up to over 100 salespeople throughout Asia for these different companies I was working with. The recurring experience was that I would come in as the foreign expert or the foreign business leader, go with salespeople to whoever was the biggest opportunity at the time, and meet senior leaders. The salespeople were using me as their opportunity to meet higher in the organization. And so I was meeting higher in their organization, helping them to progress their sale. And they were just routinely saying the wrong thing. They were leading with our products and services before properly establishing rapport. They were not presenting our company well enough. And so I was thinking like how to solve that problem. And I started with a variety of things. I was fortunate to work with quite a few different sales teams early on. And I taught questioning skills and all the classic sales training things. And because I'm someone who likes to know what the impact of the work I do is, I would contact back to those sales teams 3 to 6 months later. I would find that they had forgotten everything I taught them. And it's really disappointing. You know, in my entire career working, I'd never felt that I'm not achieving anything. You know, I'm putting all my intellectual effort into this, trying to work with these sales teams. They seem to enjoy what I do. They're responsive, but 6 months later, they've forgotten everything. And that's pretty rough, actually. That's quite tough to accept. But I was telling stories, and they were telling me stories back. So they were remembering the stories that I told, because I've got a lot of stories. And so like that sort of tweaked with me. Okay, the storytelling is working. So can I get them telling the right stories? And the first one is such an obvious story. It's the story of their company. Can they tell the story of their company? And they couldn't. And then I found that actually most companies are not that good at even researching or knowing their company story. So I would get involved in just searching their company records and talking to their company founder if the founder wasn't working in the company anymore, or talking with the founders. And that was always an engaging story, because if you think about it, most companies fail. The majority of companies fail. So why did your company succeed? If you succeeded to the level of having a sales team, you must have done something right. So what was it? And how did that start? And how did you nearly fail? And these are always interesting stories. I've never heard a company story that isn't interesting. And then can they tell their personal story? I've given you just a little smattering of mine. I appreciate we don't have a huge amount of time, but teaching them how to tell their personal story is such a fabulous thing, because if they can get it down to a couple of minutes, they have an opportunity of saying, well, enough about me, what about you?